Please stand by for further details. We return you now to your regularly scheduled program.
Are mounting over the number of bodies being pulled from the waters in Chicago, at least 10 in the last year alone. The latest unidentified body pulled from Lake Michigan last Sunday, and people across social media fearing a possible serial killer could be on the loose. The latest case eerily similar to at least 9 other disappearances and discoveries along the Chicago waterways. It started more than a year ago. Some of the bodies have been discovered just days apart. The causes of death for many of the victims still unknown. Is there a killer terrorizing the Chicago area, or is this simply a series of terrible coincidences?
Hey guys, my name is Desiree and this is Criminally Focused. Whether you're new to my channel or you're a returning OG, thank you so much for clicking on this video. I truly appreciate your support. Today we're going to be talking about a murder theory that centers around one of the world's most famous symbols, the smiley face. The smiley face has been around for years and it pretty much symbolizes happiness worldwide. So how did this happy symbol become the center of a theory regarding possibly one of the most speculated serial killers that has ever existed? The Smiley Face Murder Theory is widely debated in the true crime community, so you might have heard of it. Some strongly believe that there is a serial killer or a group of serial killers drugging, kidnapping, and eventually drowning college-aged men. While others argue that it's a ridiculous theory and it has no credible reasonings behind it. There's a lot that goes into this theory, and as you can imagine, when I started researching, I went down quite the rabbit hole. Kind of a lot of rabbit holes, actually. I gathered so much information that I actually decided to create a series of videos regarding this theory and the deaths that could be possibly connected. In each video, we're going to go over these mysterious drownings. Drownings that span years, miles, and have no suspect in mind. But were these deaths just drunken accidents, or were they part of a murder plan carried out by a serial killer or group of serial killers? No, I know what you're thinking. A group of serial killers? A little far-fetched. But hang tight, because in these videos, we're going to go over evidence that might have you thinking this theory isn't so far-fetched after all. And before I forget, viewer discretion is advised. This content is for adults only. This information that I have gathered is available to the public, so please always do your own research. And let's just be kind. There's really no reason to spread hate. And also, don't forget to hit that like button. It's a free way to help your girl out, but it would be much appreciated. All right, but enough rambling. Grab your coffee or whatever you're drinking or smoking and get comfy, and let's dive right into it.
It was a homicide. It was a murder. Somebody murdered my son. We love you, Will.
The evidence, and at least all the law enforcement officials who look into this keep saying over and over that there's no evidence of foul play and there's no evidence. So where are we?
The smiley face actually has a pretty interesting history. It was designed by freelance artist Harvey Ball in 1963 for an insurance agency that was hoping to boost the morale within their company. Harvey basically walked into the office, and within 10 minutes, he sat down and drew the yellow smiley face that I think I can safely say we all know today. Once he was finished, he sold the smiley face design to the company for a whopping $45. And by 1971, the smiley face was popping up everywhere. In the 1980s, it became a symbol of counterculture, showing up on album covers and merchandise for musicians such as Nirvana and rave scenes everywhere. By the 1990s, it started showing up in society in more sinister ways, including becoming the signature of the famous Happy Face Killer. The Happy Face Killer was an interstate truck driver who was convicted in the 90s of murdering 8 women. And when he was done, he would send letters into the police, kind of like taunting them and he would sign them with a smiley face. Today's story also begins in the 90s, specifically in 1997 with private investigator Kevin Gannon and the disappearance and drowning of Patrick McNeil. So we are going to talk about Patrick McNeil more in the next video, but for now, just know that this was the case that kind of got Gannon's attention. When 2 other drowning-related deaths happened in the same area, Gannon started to think that maybe these deaths were connected. And this, my friends, is where the Smiley Face Murder Theory began. And just like a backstory about Kevin Gannon, Gannon is a retired police sergeant in the New York City Police Department, or the NYPD. And at the time of his retirement, he had over 20 years of experience working for the department. He became head of the Bronx Task Force. He was also second in charge of the Missing Persons Unit and worked cases in robberies and narcotics. So, needless to say, the dude was hella respected and had a lot of experience. So in 2005, just a couple years after retirement, Gannon teamed up with his friends Anthony Duarte and Mike Donovan to investigate Patrick's death further. They also investigated the other suspicious drownings that had been happening in the area to see if they were connected. Gannon got so invested into this research that he actually mortgaged his own home and maxed out all of his credit cards to personally fund the investigation. About a year or so into their investigation, after watching a news report on CNN regarding suspicious drownings that were happening all over the Midwest, Gannon and his team began looking into the possible connection between these drownings and the ones that were happening in New York City. And sure enough, they began finding similarities almost immediately. At this point, Gannon and his team were joined by Dr. Lee Gilbertson. Gilbertson is a criminal justice professor and gang expert at St. Cloud University in Minnesota, and he had been looking into these murders for years.
In a broadcast exclusive, the men who first broke the news of the linkage between 17 smiley-faced murders for the first time ever are here to reveal who they think the killer or killers are. They are on your left, retired NYPD Detective Kevin Gannon, and on your right, college professor Douglas Gilbertson. And Professor, you hail from the area in Wisconsin. You teach there. Is that close to La Crosse, Wisconsin?
It's about a 3-hour drive.
Okay, but 8 of the cases are Wisconsin cases around that one town of La Crosse. And the reason, Kevin, I want to ask you or start there is that the FBI has reviewed the 8 cases in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and the FBI says, based on its review of the submitted case materials, quote, that no evidence exists to support the conclusion that a serial offender has been targeting males in La Crosse. None of the cases have been linked forensically. No singular or unusual behavior reflected in the cases that would support their linkage to a common offender. Okay, let's stick with these 8 victims. The FBI said they're not linked. Why do you think they are?
In the 6 cases, the victims were coming out of only 2 bars in all of La Crosse. La Crosse is a community of 3 universities, about 55 bars in like a 6 or 7 block radius. And 4 victims came out of 1 bar, and 2 victims were last seen coming out of another bar. That, to me, seems very compelling and shows there's got to be some kind of linkage there.
Evidence from 5 of the victims found at the foot of this statue. Can you show the statue right here, Peter? Yeah, in La Crosse. What about this, Kevin?
Well, that's this 12-foot Indian iconic statue that is in the north end of the park there, right alongside the Mississippi River. That 5 of the victims, 5 of the 8 victims that drowned, their scent was there, and property belonging to the victim was located. Hats, their wallets, summonses that one of the victims received.
Now, you mentioned the victimology. The type of victim is very interesting. I mentioned that they were college kids, good builds, pretty good grades. You say in your study here, no short or obese men were victimized, no tall obese men were victimized, no short or tall underweight men, but all the victims in this range of normal. What's the significance?
But I calculated the body mass index for the victims that we have in our data set, and that's how they plot out. Now, you can't tell me that if we had a normal distribution of society, of a sampling from a population, we should have extremes on the end. We should have those short, skinny people, short, fat people like me, and, tall, fat people and tall, skinny people, and you just don't have them.
Does that tell you that a specific type of young man was being targeted by the smiley face killer?
Yes.
In 2006, the team began traveling to the different locations where the victims were found, checking for clues or evidence that might have been left behind. In 2007, Gannon's company, which was called Global Death Investigations, or GDI, was officially established. By 2013, ABC7 in Chicago reported that since 1997, the number of mysteriously drowned college-aged men had grown to over 200. And all of these deaths shared common similarities between Gannon's Smiley Face Murder Theory. The victims' bodies were found in lakes, rivers, ponds, just any body of water, basically, and where they were thought to have either entered the water or where their bodies were found. Over 22 smiley faces were found in those locations.
9 of the smiley faces were said to have been drawn with horns.
These victims' bodies were found weeks to months after they were reported missing and showed little signs of decomposition in many cases. It was also reported that 30 of these victims had GHB, or the date rape drug, in their system. By 2020, the team's database of mysteriously drowned college-aged men had reached over 300. He truly believes that this is one of the most sophisticated groups of serial killers that has ever existed in the United States, and he believes they communicate via the dark web.
So the dark web is basically just a deeper piece of the internet that's only really accessible through an app such as Tor. It's not monitored like the web browser that's used by most people. And although not everyone that uses the dark web is a criminal, many are. The dark web is like a safe haven for criminals, allowing them to access people's personal information like social security numbers, buy illegal drugs, and sell indecent photos and videos. If you think of the internet as the ocean, the top portion of the ocean is the internet that the average person like you and I access. And then you go down a little bit further into the deep web, where we can access things such as medical records. And then down the deepest you can go, you have the dark web, where if you're not careful, you could easily find yourself viewing things that you'll never be able to forget. Gannon believes this is where the group connected to the Smiley Face Murder Theory can be found.
Tracy Walders, former FBI agent, professor of criminal justice, with us now. Look, Tracy, journalists, FBI agents, none of us are trained to believe in coincidences, but at the same time, we're also trained to follow the evidence. And at least all the law enforcement officials who look into this keep saying over and over that there's no evidence of foul play, and there's no evidence. So where are we?
The reality is we are going to have accidental drownings. That it happens. There's no question about that. But what is very unusual here are these clusters that you mentioned, and the fact that it really coincides with that 1-year break that you mentioned in Chicago. And really during that 1-year break is when those clusters picked back up in Austin. And look, I'm a very pragmatic, logical person. I do not ascribe to conspiracy theories, but I'm sorry, there's just too many coincidences here and the same type of demographic of the victims that are appearing in these clusters.
And to the point, at some point when you have 11 deaths in Chicago, 7 in Austin, the statistics, as I've been looking at this, just don't match up, that it would be so many young men so close together in the exact same sort of circumstances. At what point does it become statistically impossible? And what I'm curious when we hear this, because these are men sort of all fit the same pattern on and on and on, why the FBI wouldn't be more focused on something like this.
You know, I think that that's a great point, Leland, and part of me wonders, and I'm just hypothesizing here, this was originally born out of what you mentioned before, that smiley face killer theory. And that really came about in the late 90s, early 2000s, 2010, where we found that, 45 bodies of males, same age, same demographic, were found with those smiley faces and graffiti next to them. And I think people started ascribing to that as being a conspiracy theory, and law enforcement, as a result, sort of brush these off.
Help us understand, if these bodies are, retrieved from the water and then turned over to the families and buried. Obviously, you've got families that are distraught and on and on and on. If it's not treated as a murder from the very beginning, how much evidence in all of these cities, and especially in Austin and Chicago, might have been lost if later we learn, hey, these were part of some kind of sick serial killer's travels?
You know what, Leland, that is an excellent question, and one that I really haven't been asked about this. I think that's really key here because these were not treated as murders or as homicides. Some of them do have a manner of death as being undetermined. Really, evidence in those cases wouldn't be preserved because everything would be released back to the families. But digital evidence, their cell phones, all of that data most likely is not preserved. And those are key pieces of evidence that we would need to see what their final locations were and when their bodies really ended up in the water. We would have lost a ton of evidence. And really what we're stuck with now are simply autopsy reports.
And then you have the other side of this theory where many people believe this theory is absolutely ridiculous. They believe that these deaths were unfortunate and accidental and related to alcohol. According to the CDC, nearly 80% of drowning victims are actually men, and 70% of total drownings usually related to alcohol. Now, the FBI, as well as the Center for Homicide Research, have publicly expressed their disbelief in this opinion. They have released a press release and a research study that calls the Smiley Face Murder Theory a myth. The research study that they came out with had a pretty distasteful title, in my opinion. It was called Drowning the Smiley Face Murder Theory, and it came out in 2010. In this research study, it goes on to point out several reasons why there's no way that a serial killer could exist. But are these reasons actually factual, or are they just made up to try to persuade an audience that might not know about true crime like you and I? The study goes on to point out that there is no real information about the age of the smiley face paintings or the distance that's required for a smiley face to even count. According to the Center for Homicide Research, there is existing evidence that they have that can prove that these smiley face graffiti symbols have nothing to do with these victims' deaths. According to the Center for Homicide Research, there is existing evidence that can prove graffiti has nothing to do with these deaths. They have claimed to see photographs of these actual smiley faces that are being linked to these deaths. And these photographs were either taken weeks to months before the deaths or months after. And it kind of sucks because there's no possible way to figure out the exact age of the graffiti down to the exact day that it was painted. Forensically, it's only possible to narrow it down to the year that it was painted. The study also goes on to explain that no two smiley faces look the same, meaning that there's no common width, height, or curve of the letters. The study goes on to explain that these victims' bodies showed no signs of trauma. However, in the upcoming videos, you'll find out that that's a total lie. Some of these victims did have trauma in their bodies. So, in my opinion, it's kind of an injustice to them to say otherwise. Another point that they make that I adamantly disagree with is when they say that water doesn't wash away evidence. So, if you know anything about this, please comment below. But from everything that I know from research cases, water significantly destroys evidence at crime scenes. So, this sounds like just another straight out lie. Why would they need to lie to get their point across if they're telling the truth? It's a very interesting read, so if you want to check it out, it's listed in the description box below. While I was researching, looking through Reddit and taking it with a grain of salt, and talking to different people in my life, an interesting theory was brought up. What if this group of serial killers does exist, and it's a group of women? You know, the girl version of incels? I don't know, just think about it. But so far, what do you think? Do you think this is just drunken accidents, or do you think this is a work of a sophisticated gang of serial killers? So in the next videos, we are going to talk about 3 of the victims. I would love to be able to talk about all of them, but obviously that's not possible. In the upcoming videos, we will discuss these 3 homicides and why many believe they are connected. Please always keep in mind when you're commenting below that these are real people with real families that still need justice. So keep your comments respectful, but I want to hear from you. I want to hear your thoughts, what you agree with, what you disagree with, maybe things that you've heard. But yeah, let's have a discussion. But right now, if you can't tell, which from looking at the viewfinder, you definitely can, but I am sweating, I'm hot, feeling nasty with all these lights, and it's so hot outside. Thank you so much for listening to this video. Thank you for being here with me, and hopefully I will see you very soon in part 2. Again, if you haven't already and you liked what you saw, please hit that like button and subscribe. Make sure your notification bell is on so that way you can join me in the future. All right, guys, until next time, stay safe. Bye.